Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to do something a little bit different. So you might remember these guys. I showed them off a little bit on a previous video which I did about the big guy that came in the same box, and I painted that dude in a nice green color scheme. But today what I want to do is I want to paint them according to the original color scheme, which looks a little bit like this, but we are going to do it very simply, getting as close as we can to this, but without spending too much time on it and using mostly contrast paints. Hey guys, I'm Zoltan and you're watching Phalanx Miniatures. So first, before we do any kind of contrast painting, what I want to do is to do a Zenithal highlight. But even before that, I'm going to just paint all of these guys, or even prime these guys, just to be red, and then apply the Zenithal over that. So let's do that first, and I'm going to be using an airbrush for that, as you can see, but you can use a rattle can as well if you want, or you can just prime the models red from the get-go if you want to. And I'll be using burnt red for this, because it's a nice red. There is no other reason really. I wanted to go for something that is relatively dark. So let's just do that. Nice and easy. Just apply it all over the whole model, like this. And the reason I want to do this is because I want to have a nice transition between the red and the blue on the model. No reason to go super bright, so I don't need full coverage or something. I just want this to be normally relatively red, like so. As you can see, it's super fast. I can go a bit higher in the color intensity in the places where I want the colors to be like brighter a little bit and more vibrant. It's actually especially important to cover the shadow areas, because you are going to be covering all the highlights with the Zenithal, the white basically, anyway, but we need to make sure that whatever remains in the shadows will still be somewhat red. So the end result should look like this. Okay, so now we are done with the red. It's time to apply the Zenithal highlight, and we are going to be using this color. You can use any white actually, but this is the easiest to use because it's already formulated for the airbrush, so I don't really need to thin it either. And if you want to know how to do a Zenithal, there is a video on the channel that I will put in the corner if you want to check it out before doing this. So as you can see, here's the white in the airbrush, and all I need to do is to hold the model like this, make sure that I only hit the surfaces on the top, and gently apply the whites. It's important to go for full coverage because we need the full color of the contrast paint to shine through, and we need a really bright undercoat for that. As you can see, it's still red under, right? If you turn it like this, you can see the red in the shadows. But if you turn it like this, it's actually fully white. I still need a couple of coats, but in general, it's better to just go slowly and apply multiple coats until you're satisfied. You can also take care of small specific areas if you feel that just naturally spraying from the top, that thing doesn't get sprayed. You can just go in and spray that specifically. You don't have to like stick with exactly where the Zenithal hits. So for example, if I want this inner tie a little bit more white, I could be like doing this, because I feel that's more in the light than, for example, on this other side here, right? Same with this arm. I could just be, okay, this lower arm, I want this a bit more white, so it's gonna be more blue in the end once I apply the contrast. All right, so there you go. Like, it's still reddish underneath, but very much white from the top. Let's do the other one. And look at the shield. You can create a nice color transition that later will show up in blue if you do it in a way that you leave the underside mostly red and then start to do a color transition on the top. So just apply a little bit of white like this, and the top is going to be white there, and I just leave it at that. So this way, this underside is going to be much darker once I apply the contrast, and the top side is going to be much more vibrant and blue. You can also play with the light a little bit in a way that if you look at that leg, I'm going to, that like in the shadows behind the shield, I will leave that basically like this without adding more white, and this other one is going to receive a lot more white because that's more in the light, so we want to have more color on that one. And I realized that I forgot the sword because we want to use contrast paint on that as well, believe it or not, so I will paint that as well. I will leave it a little bit like this, so it's not evenly painted, because this will create a color transition once we apply the contrast paint on it. So they look like this. Right, and you can see the red is still shining through, but because of how bright the white is, you can see it here. That red that looked super brilliant before, now it looks like it's almost black. That's why it serves us so well in the shadows, because in contrast with the white, it's actually quite dark. Still red underneath, white on the top. Okay, so now that we are done with the Zenithal highlight, it's time to do step 3, which is to apply the contrast paints. And for the blue, I decided to go with a Sermon Blue, or whatever this is called, from Citadel. So I'll try to use maybe this. I haven't done contrast paint in a while, so let's see if this maybe is a bit too small for this, but I want to make sure that I don't hit anything else other than the blue armor, because we want to basically paint everything with contrast paints. So ideally everything that is white right now should either be blue or white still after this step, right? So we have to be careful. Nice. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to switch to a slightly bigger brush, because I want to paint this, and this is a pretty light surface, so I just want to make sure that I manage to cover the whole thing nicely. Okay, so first color is done, and now it's time to do the second one. There's only going to be 3, so it's relatively easy. So this one is Basilica and Gray, and I will be using it for all the, let's say, black and metallic parts mostly. And this color is going to be making everything a little bit more neat in the end, if everything goes according to plan, because it's basically like a nice concealer, so to say. This might also need more than one coat, but this will allow me to create kind of like a non-metallic effect on some of these things relatively easily. It's a very basic non-metallic effect, of course, but still. Together with a couple of edge highlights, this will make things quite nice. Alright, so this is how they look at this stage, And now we can go on to paint the gold, except there is one little thing that I'm going to do because I managed to stain quite a bit of those little pieces. So I'm going to take a little bit of gray and bring those back and correct my mistakes so that the gold can actually look like gold and not just like blue. Alright, so I'm going to be using some silver gray here to correct the mistakes. And I'm not using pure white because pure white would stick out or stand out way too much from the rest of the model because our Zenithal is not exactly pure white since it didn't cover fully. So I will just use this gray. And I'm not going to repaint the whole thing, I'm just going to try to correct some of the mistakes a little bit, and this will also allow me to kind of use it almost as a highlight as well, because I can apply it a little bit more strongly on some pieces. Alright, so we are done with the first two colors and it's time for the last big color, like the last of the three that I want to paint on these models, and I am kind of torn right now because there are two options that I see. One of them is that I would be using Yandan yellow. This is a little bit more orangish and this would get a little bit more color on the models, right? And then the other option would be to go with something like Iron Jaws yellow, it's called. Yep. And this is a bit more goldish, I would say, because this is more a yellow gold. I'm wondering which one would be better actually. And I am tending towards trying Iron Jaws because I tried Yandan yellow before and it wasn't bad, but I think we should try this, and if it doesn't work then I can still go back and do Yandan instead. Alright, let's try this. So Iron Jaws yellow, first try. We're going to try this dude right here. And I think this should be fine if I cover it with two coats. That's my plan at least. Well, I think I made the right choice. I would say so, yeah. Alright, so we have the three main colors on the Mini mostly. Now let's do some of the additional elements with some less important colors. For example, for the swords, I wanted to use Frostheart. Because we are already doing the swords, let's also do the hilt of the sword. Let's use Sigwald Burgundy for this. Let's use the most typical color for the skin, which is Gilliman Flesh. And to match the box art, we are also going to use two colors for the hair. And this guy is gonna be simply black. So we're going to be using Black Templar for this. I wanted to say Black Legion, but it's going to be Black Templar. And his friend is gonna be a ginger. He is gonna have some Gryph-hound orange on his hair. Ooh, that's gonna be interesting. Maybe I will regret this choice, but let's see. I think it's gonna be nice. Should be. Yeah, it's gonna be nice, especially with the second coat. Alright, so we are done with the contrast paint phase, and it's time to highlight stuff. So it's time for some normal acrylics, and I'm going to be starting with the blue armor, of course. So let's do that, and my plan is to use Ducat Blue, which is a pretty light color, but my assumption is that because we want to do this relatively fast, I don't want to build this up too slowly, like from one color to the other, like with like 4 highlights. Instead, I just want to do 2 and want those to be really striking. So we will go with that high contrast approach and see how it looks in the end. So I just take this from my wet palette. I'm using a relatively large brush but with a really nice tip, and I am going to try and edge highlight this model. I'm not going to hit every single edge, but I'll try to go for most of them. If they're fully in the dark areas of the model, I will just leave them be. But for most of the edges, it's actually beneficial if I hit them with this one at least. Also, don't be afraid to go back and use 2 layers of edge highlights. Sometimes one is just not enough. You really want this to be visible, and also it's very important to move the model around like this, because then you can hit the edge with the side of the brush, and that helps a lot. See, I'm just hitting it with the side of the brush, but I do this multiple times because I really want this to show up. Like, it needs to be visible. It needs to draw the eye, because I want the viewer to look at these highlights rather than the imperfections that the contrast paint caused. So the question then is, like, why did I actually use contrast paint, right? Well, the answer is because it's way faster than anything else. If you want to finish your models fast, then contrast paints are definitely one way to do it. But you will always pay with some loss of quality. But look at this, like, initially it looked really bad with all those blotches, but as soon as you start adding the highlights, it suddenly becomes much nicer, because your eye just wants to see highlights like this on a model like that. It brings out the details. So I'm going to actually use it even on the downward facing edge, just to make it look nicer, like this. So we are also going to do this hidden edge. So obviously this is an edge, right? But there is also an edge here, or like a separation line, and I'm going to paint that in, this one. And I'm going to paint it basically by the tip of the brush, see? You don't have to be perfect with this. Like, this paint job is already not perfect because we're using contrast paint. So we just want mostly, well, contrast really, right? The contrast paints created some contrast for us. But the funny thing is that contrast paints actually are not very good at creating contrast in the end. So, at least not the kind of contrast that we would want to go for in a high quality paint job. So we'll just help them a little bit with some additional contrast on these panels like this. Okay, so this is how it looks after the first edge highlight color, and I think it already looks much better. But now we are going to go one step further and use an even brighter color, which is sky blue. And this is going to be our final highlight as well for this model. Alright, so with this one I need to be a bit more careful and try to be a bit more sparing as well in where I put it. But let's see, so much less edges, or much fewer edges rather, need to be covered by this. So I just go for the ones that are the most visible and mostly facing up. And I'm also going to go for the ones that are mostly on the top of the model. Like, for example, I will cover this edge, but I'm not going to go for this one because it's definitely not in the light. And I'm going to cover a little bit of this one because this would be still glinting. But the best way to explain this is that, for example, I will cover most of this edge. Not this one, but for example this one. Like not until the end, just here on top. But I will not cover most of the downward facing ones except this. Imagine that the light is coming from here. What would it actually hit? It would hit this edge, this one, but not this one, because that's facing down, right? So like this. So ideally, this is relatively subtle. Like for example, I think the light is coming from here, right? That's how we sprayed him. So now I'm going to cover this edge, but I'm not going to cover this one because that's already not in the light. I'm also going to cover a little bit of this one, just a bit. But I'm also going to cover this thing here. Alright, now that I'm done with the armor, I could move on to the rest of the elements, but instead what I'm going to do is I will try to freehand the Torchlight Brigade logo on his breastplate first. This is the thing that we are going for. See, like a little torch with two wings on the side. The paint I chose for this is volcanic yellow, which is a really nice and very vibrant yellow, with still a little bit of white in it. So let's see, we need one line that is basically at the very top here. Let's see if I can draw that line. Like this. I'm not going to draw it too strongly for now. Then there is another line that goes like... I might have actually done this a little bit too far down, but we shall see. Like this. Well, it's not exactly like the one on the picture, but it looks good enough. Got to strengthen it a bit. Like that. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side as well. So let's see if I can replicate this mostly. Like this far. Like that. Comes down like this and has two small wings under. Well, the other one is a bit nicer, I would say, but the right side was definitely easier, for sure. Now I'm going to use a little bit of the original contrast paint to try and correct this a bit. Like that. And then we can go back with the yellow and strengthen it further. minimize the top a bit. And I think this upper one needs to be a bit longer. Okay, and now we are going to do the little flame bit. Like that. Then what we are going to do is, it seems that it's basically a little rectangle, right? Like here. With a less wide, kind of tapering off rectangle underneath, like this, right? Something like that. It has a little cross section or cross guard or whatever the thing is, like here. Oops. Like that. Huh. Well, that's not bad, right? It's not perfect at all, but it's actually quite close. Okay, so that's actually pretty good for a first try, I would say. Not perfect by any means, but it's okay. Alright, so we are done with the blue. It's time to do some metals or non-metallics on this contrast paint, which is going to be interesting, but let's see what we can do. So I'll start with the steel parts. So let's start with this guy first. And my plan is to use graphite, and then I'll figure out whether I want to use medium gray maybe, and then go to silver gray, or just go to silver gray immediately after graphite, if I think that's enough. We shall see. But first, let's start with graphite. Alright. So the nice thing about this is that the Basilicanum gray that I was using is actually already providing us with all the highlights. It is actually really good at leaving the edge highlights more visible than, let's say, the blue did. We also only did one single coat of this, of course. It doesn't work every time, but for example on this, like, part of this kneecap or whatever this is, it actually shows pretty nicely that here is where the edge highlights go, and we can just work with that. So let's start. Let's start with that, actually. I can reinforce that a little bit like this. But we need these other edges as well. I want to hit all the edges with this initially. And we can also do a couple of scratches and dots here and there as well later. My idea is to try medium gray first on this model, see how it works, and if it's good then we will just use it on the rest. If not, then we can maybe consider doing an immediate switch to silver gray. And I will try to use this a little bit thinner and mostly on the edges that could be hit by the light. So I'm not going to be using this on every single edge like I tried to do with the previous color. But for example, this kneecap is definitely in the light, at least the upper parts and everything on the right. So I will do it like here. But even here I don't need to cover the whole edge fully. Alright, let's move on to some silver gray, which is going to be the final highlight. And I'm going to use this only on the edges that are really hit by the lights and the ones that I really want to emphasize. But I'm trying to keep the previous colors visible underneath as well. But this is a very strong color, it's very, very close to white actually, so we have to be very careful about this, because if you overdo this and cover too much of the previous color, then it just completely loses the effect. So try to just put this in places where you think the metal would be glinting. So edges that are facing towards the light, facing up mostly. And for example here, it's not much sense putting it over the overall edge, maybe a little bit to this edge here, to this corner really, because everything else is really in shadow, so there would be only a couple of glinting elements on the inside of the shield. Like a couple of small dots here and there, like maybe there, right? The only reason I even care about this is because it's going to be visible from the front if we want to look at the model like this. So you have to care about it a little bit, but otherwise this edge would not be. Alright, so we are done with the metal. Let's do the gold. And the first color I'm going to be using is Sahara Yellow, and then we will see where we go after that. So I'm going to be using this as an edge highlight, of course, but also as a correction, basically, or a means to correct some of the mistakes that I made with the contrast paint. It's very close to the color that we want the gold to be, like what the original contrast paint actually provided us with, so it's relatively easy to use this as a tool to correct some of those mistakes. So now that we are done with the Sahara Yellow, I'm going to use a little bit of Sand Yellow because I think the Sahara was a little bit too close, so it's not really acting as an edge highlight, but it was good to just correct some mistakes with it. So Sand Yellow is going to be our first true edge highlight. We're going to jump up to Ice Yellow after the Sand Yellow. Okay, let's do the swords because we only have a couple of elements left. So the swords, the hair, and the face, I would say. Plus, I need to do something about the base as well, but the sword should be relatively easy. I will actually use the same blue that I was using for the armor as well initially, the sky blue, and then we will transition to a pastel blue. And that should be enough, I think. And if not, then we can go one step higher, but we'll see. So let's first do the sky blue, see how it looks, and then we can go from there. I'm going to bring back the frost light a little bit because I think I went a bit overboard with the highlights here. Let's do the pastel blue. So let's do something about those faces. So here I'm going to actually go back to my trusty Citadel colors and do something with Bugman's Glow first. Just to lighten up the skin tone a little bit. And this is actually quite close to the Guilliman's Flash, or it synergizes well with it, at least in my experience. That's why I'm going with this rather than something from AK. I haven't found something or anything that really goes well with this. And then we will go for some Cadian Flesh Tone. And finally, a little bit of Kislev Flash. Alright, let's do something about the bases before we finish. And instead of doing the usual thing where I just put some kind of product on it, let's just do something with dry brushing. So I'll try medium orange on top of this like reddish rust color that we already have and see how that goes. Alright, and now let's do one more step up in brightness and do light orange. But only sparingly so that we don't overlap fully with the previous color and some of it remains visible. And the end result looks like this. They are not going to win any painting competitions, but on the tabletop they should look pretty damn good. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please consider giving it a like, and if you didn't like it, give it a dislike. You will help the channel either way. See you in the next one.